Folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Well, we've been covering a lot of the stuff going on in the news over the last couple of weeks, especially in Russia and truckers on strike and crazy stuff going on in Washington and this kind of stuff. But there's been something that the news media really hasn't been covering much, and I think that there's a reason for that. In fact, they haven't been covering this for, forever. And that's what we've talked about several times. That's the grand solar minimum. If you don't know about what that is, if you've never heard of that before or you're unsure of that, I've made some videos in the past on it, and there've been others here on YouTube that make some excellent quality videos explaining what it is without going into detail of that. Folks, we've been talking on this channel for better than 2 years about what we're going to do when this happens, and the grand solar minimum on the way, and it's coming, and it's going to change things. And folks, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's here, and we're living with it, and we're going to start seeing more and more strange events when it comes to weather that we just don't understand, and it's going to start having an effect. One of the YouTube channels on here that greatly talks about that is Ice Age Farmer. I would encourage you to go subscribe and watch a lot of his videos, because he does probably the best analysis of the whole thing and how it's going to affect us. But I just want to point out today some of the stuff that's happening in our weather pattern changes that a lot of people just think, oh, it's just a strange day of the weather. It's just a weird year. It's just a weird season. But it's starting to create a pattern. And I think it's going to affect us for the next few years to come. And that's one of the reasons why we've been talking about on this channel for so long, of getting your gardens ready, growing your own food, raising your own foods, prepping, stocking up. Because when you add together all the stuff that's going on right now, with supply chain problems, inflation, increased prices of fertilizer just to produce the food, shortage of parts for the equipment to run farmers to plant and to harvest food. When you look at things that are happening like increased volcanic activity and the recent Tonga volcano that has a very likely chance of lowering global temperatures, maybe even a half a degree. And you add all that to what's going on with the grand solar minimum, the likelihood that we're going to continually see food prices increase and food shortages increase is very good. And what we've experienced over the last couple of years with increased food prices and increased food shortages, or just hard to get to some of the food, I think it's just scratching the surface, folks. And we need to start getting ready. And I want to show you some stuff. Weather's been crazy. For those of you folks down in the Carolinas, Virginia, even all the way down into Florida, it's been crazy weather for you, haven't it? I have been kind of keeping track of this, and just in my own unscientific ways. And I've been noticing that places down in, say, South Texas and down in Florida at times are showing, and this is just within the last week, are showing colder temperatures than up in Alaska. We're seeing the Middle East showing very cold temperatures. And let's look at this. This is Israel, Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem in Israel had a pretty serious snowstorm that came through. Now, it's not uncommon for them to get snow up in the hills outside the city, but down in the city, this is very uncommon, and especially the amount. If they ever do get snow, it's usually just a dusting, and they got several inches of snow. Same way as in Turkey. There's been a lot of problems. They've had to shut highways down. Over in Greece, very unusual snows in Greece. There's been cold weather in Egypt. There's been cold weather and snows in the Sahara Desert. And then over here in the United States, I want to point out, this is what I'm going to show you here. These are some weather models over the next couple of weeks' time. And look at this one with the snow. Now these are total snow accumulations between now and I believe it's like February 12th is what they're showing. And look at the southeast, the Carolinas, Virginia, they're expecting to have accumulations between now, this isn't one total snowfall, but the forecast models are showing that between now and, close to the middle of February, they could have an overall accumulation of up to 2 feet, 2 feet of snow. That's pretty significant. Look down there in southern Arkansas. They're looking at 10 to 12 inches of snow over the next couple of weeks. This is some pretty significant snowfalls for areas that don't normally get that kind of snow. In fact, some of these places are showing more snow accumulation in the models than up in the northern regions of the country that are typically the ones that get this kind of stuff. Here's some weather temperatures. Models on the temperature. This here, I think this is this is in the 1st of February, and I apologize, I can't remember the exact date. I don't have it in front of me. But these are below normal temperatures. So this isn't the actual temperature. This is how much below normal, and showing down into Florida again that they're showing below normal temperatures, 20 degrees below normal. Here in the 1st of February. Same way with the actual temperatures. They're showing actual temperatures. Now, if you notice in all of these weather models, it's showing almost kind of that V shape. And over on the West Coast, and sometimes even up in the Northwest, and especially up in Alaska, if you look at the temperatures, and these maps don't show Alaska, they're staying pretty warm up there. Well, that's not that unusual for a grand solar minimum. This graph here is showing the last grand solar minimum back in the 1700s. This was the one that, if you know your history well, you can go back into the 1700s during the Revolution, where it was extremely cold. You can read stories, for those of you history buffs. You read stories about how bitterly cold it was, and how rivers froze, and how there was snow and cold weather late into the year. And we wonder, what in the world? Well, that was what was called the mini ice age, and that was a grand solar minimum that happened. Now, this chart here shows temperature differences between that grand solar minimum, the Marauder minimum, that happened at that time, and normal temperatures during that time. And if you notice, the same areas that experienced much colder than normal temperatures are the same areas that today are experiencing colder than normal temperatures. And in those yellow areas, that's the areas that experienced warmer than normal temperatures. And guess what? That is exactly what's going on now. Areas up in the very northern regions that we would expect to be really cold are actually warmer. In fact, there's scientific data indicating that during ice ages and mini ice ages, that the Arctic regions actually go through a warming period, and then the more southern regions south of those Arctic regions are actually colder than normal. And for a lot of people, that just doesn't make sense. And of course, with the climate change narrative, official narrative, that doesn't work either. But the fact is that we are in the midst of a grand solar minimum, and all of this unusually cold weather in places that it's not normally cold, and heavy snows in areas that we don't normally get them, and then other areas that would expect to get very cold and heavy snows aren't getting quite what they're used to getting. This is actually the grand solar minimum, folks. And while last year's winter was a little off, this year's winter is already off. And that, you think, well, it's just weird. This affects planting. This affects growing seasons. This affects how much food can be harvested. Last year, we already saw in many different types of crops that they didn't quite get the crop production that they expected. That was considered normal. It was because of strange things happening in the weather. This will continue to happen, and it will continue to worsen. And we live in a society that our food production system is very finely tuned, and it's designed to have the maximum amount of production to feed as many people as possible, and it works, if everything works. It's like one of those fancy cars, you know, when the thing's running, it runs like crazy. But when it doesn't run, it's just a pain in the hind end. And that's kind of how our food production system is. And when you start throwing little wrenches in it with changes of weather, weather patterns, too much rain, not enough rain, too cold, the growing season doesn't last as long, it throws it into complete havoc. And that's when we start getting into famine level shortages. This is something that we will very possibly see, folks. I mean, I'm not making any promises, I'm not making predictions or guarantees, but if we continue in this pattern and adding to that of inflation, global inflation, geopolitical problems across the planet, and the health crisis and all the stuff that's going on, it is an absolute recipe for disaster. There are some, and I won't go into this, but there are some that believe that that's the whole reason behind this great reset, is because they see this coming. They know it's going to happen, and so they have to change things and gain control, a foothold, so that they can have as much control as possible for when this happens. This year, there's already a lot of predictions out there and a lot of analysts that are saying that food costs are going to just be astronomical and that there's not going to be as much being produced. I've talked several times on this channel how China has been in a buying frenzy for the last few years. They have been buying up about every bit of food on the planet that they can: corn, soybean, wheat, sorghum, all kinds of things. I mean, they are stockpiling massive amounts. You gotta at least question that. I mean, that's kind of unusual. And you know, like them or not, the Chinese people and their government, they are pretty good at kind of, you know, thinking ahead and planning out years in advance. And that's something that they're known for, and they have been doing that. I mean, they've been buying about everything that America has to sell, Brazil, Australia, and other countries. And they have some of the, you know, largest stockpiles of food and other certain commodities on the whole planet. And so when you see that they're prepping up, you see all this stuff that's happening, and it's, you know, maybe not any one thing is going to be disastrous, but there's a lot of us going on at the same time, and it is a recipe for disaster. So folks, I know I'm a broken record, but you gotta be serious about this. Get your gardens out this year. Make them as big as possible. Make plans, if you can, to build hoop houses, greenhouses, high tunnels, something like that. You know, really start, you know, adding, you know, fertilizers, manures, compost, and stuff into your garden to get the maximum amount of food that you can. Because for right now, the reality is most people gardening, it's a hobby. You know, I mean, you do eat out of it and everything, but most of you are not in a place that you have to eat out of your garden to survive. You do it because you want to, right? You do it to maybe save money, to eat healthy. But the reality is, if you didn't have it, you could survive. That may not always be the case, folks. And so get out there and expand. Figure out what's the maximum amount that you can grow, that you can store, that you can preserve. The same way with animals. You know, what kind of feed can you grow for your animals? Because all that is going to start getting more and more expensive. It's already been going up. And it's also going to become harder and harder to come by, because these temperatures and these temperature changes and seasonal changes, they're not going away anytime too soon. We've still got, you know, another decade or two at least to live through this grand solar minimum. And so you got to take this serious. I understand all this other stuff going on. It captures our attention because it's immediate. It's happening right now. But don't lose sight of this that's happening, because it has some really long-term problems. And you know, we start getting to a place, you know, potentially in the next 5 to 10 years where there's actual true famine level starvation and food shortages. That's going to be very catastrophic. So folks, get out there, get your houses in order, prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and especially spiritually. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.